welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Today, we're unpacking a concept that, well, it might sound a little dry on the surface, but it has the potential to completely upend your business if you aren't paying close attention. We're decoding the German concept of the Betriebsstätte, or the permanent establishment. See, a recent 2026 administrative mandate just laid out the rules for what actually constitutes a taxable business presence in Germany, and let me tell you, it is absolutely full of hidden traps. Whether you're a multinational corporation or just a solo digital entrepreneur, you really need to understand this incredibly comprehensive framework.
Now, to truly understand what we're dealing with here, we are going straight to the source. This isn't just us speculating. We're looking directly at the comprehensive administrative principles issued by the Bundesministerium der Finanzen. That's the German Federal Ministry of Finance, and this is dated June 2026. These are the strict, actual guidelines that the German tax authorities are going to use to determine if your business owes them money.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question. Literally. Could renting a simple desk in a Berlin co-working space, or maybe setting up a seasonal market stall, or even just live streaming right from your bedroom accidentally trigger a massive German tax bill? Well, the short answer is, it absolutely could. The rules of our digital age are crashing headfirst into these traditional physical tax laws, and honestly, ignorance is just not a defense anymore.
So here is our comprehensive roadmap for today. First, defining the permanent establishment. Second, the 4 core criteria. Third, rooting the business activity. Fourth, management and reps. Fifth, domestic versus treaty law. And finally, number 6, modern workplaces.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, defining the permanent establishment, the Section 12 AO foundation.
To understand the trap, we really have to understand the foundation it's built on. In German tax law, the whole shebang starts with Section 12 of the Fiscal Code, also known as the Abgabenordnung. The text gives us this core definition. A Betriebsstätte, or permanent establishment, is any fixed business facility or installation that serves the activity of an enterprise. Now, what's absolutely crucial in this definition is that word, fixed. The Ministry of Finance explicitly states that you don't necessarily need a mechanical connection to the ground. You don't need a concrete foundation. Simply being located at the exact same geographic spot can be enough to be considered fixed in the eyes of the tax office.
Moving on to Section 2, the 4 core criteria. These are the non-negotiable pillars.
So Section 12 doesn't just leave it at a broad definition. It establishes this highly comprehensive, strict 4-part test. The law treats these as the non-negotiable pillars of a permanent establishment. Here are the 4 criteria that must all be met. First, there's got to be a business facility or installation. Second, it needs a fixed spatial and temporal connection to the Earth's surface. Third, it directly serves the enterprise. And fourth, the taxpayer has to have a non-temporary power of disposition over it. Basically, that means you have some level of lasting control over the space. The really crucial point to remember here is that these 4 pillars don't just exist in a vacuum. The document explicitly states they have to be assessed in their interaction with one another. A super strong spatial connection might completely change how authorities view your temporal connection, and vice versa.
But you might be wondering, when we talk about a temporal connection, what does that actually mean in the real world? Well, it boils down to this massive, incredibly important number, 6. 6 months. That is the temporal threshold. If your facility is intended to be in a specific place for at least 6 months, it counts as having temporal stability. And listen, here's the real kicker from the source. Even if you actually end up staying for less than 6 months, actually, let me rephrase that. If your original intention was to be there for 6 months, boom, you've triggered the criteria. Your intention matters just as much as reality here.
Okay, Section 3, rooting the business activity, the Verwurzeln concept.
This section deals with what is probably one of the most fascinating metaphorical concepts in the entire German tax code. The document refers to it as Verwurzelung, which translates directly to rooting. So for a facility to directly serve a business, which is our 3rd core criterion, the entrepreneurial activity must be literally rooted in that specific place. It implies a really concrete spatial and temporal bond. And I think this brilliantly illustrates the difference between having a dedicated office desk and just, dropping your laptop on a shared community table. The source text explicitly points out that generic shared community rooms without a concrete business-specific allocation do not create this rooting. Your business actually has to sink its roots into a specific space for the tax liability to grow.
Right. Let's look at Section 4, Management and Representatives, the floating trap.
So, what happens if you're a modern digital nomad, or maybe an executive who's just constantly traveling? You might think, hey, I've outsmarted the system because I never stay anywhere for 6 months. Well, not so fast.
The Ministry of Finance has definitely thought of that. And that brings us to the rules surrounding management and representatives. The source document uses this really striking, kind of philosophical phrase, no floating income. According to Section 12, Sentence 2, income cannot just exist out there in the ether. Every single taxpayer generating business income must have a permanent establishment at their place of management. So even if you're a traveling entrepreneur without a fixed physical store, your place of management acts as your default permanent establishment. The tax authorities are simply not going to allow your income to float around untaxed. No way.
And it gets even trickier when we look at Section 13, which is all about permanent representatives. Let's say a foreign company doesn't have a physical office in Germany at all, but they regularly send an employee over the border every single week to acquire orders or represent the business sustainably. That human being, acting sustainably on your behalf, can absolutely trigger a permanent establishment. A physical building isn't even required if you have a deeply rooted human representative acting under your instruction.
Next up is Section 5, Domestic versus Treaty Law, the international clash.
This presents a really fascinating conflict, because while Germany has its own very strict domestic views on all this, we obviously live in a globalized world governed by international treaties. The Ministry of Finance document actually spends a significant amount of time comparing the German domestic view with the international treaty view, specifically looking at the OECD Model Tax Convention, or OECD-MA. Article 5 of the OECD-MA defines a permanent establishment just slightly differently than German domestic law does, and the clash almost always comes down to who truly controls a space and what happens when an employee works on somebody else's property.
To really brilliantly illustrate this clash, the document specifically cites the painter example. Imagine you have a commercial painter who spends 8 months working inside a large client's office building. Under some international views, working out of a client's building for that long could absolutely create a permanent establishment for the painter's company. But the German domestic view says no. Why? Because the building itself is the object of the painter's work, not the painter's own business facility. It's a subtle but massive distinction, and it completely dictates which country gets to tax the income.
Finally, we've reached Section 6, Modern and Moving Workplaces. These are the edge cases. Now that we've gone through this comprehensive framework, the spatial connections, the 6-month rule, the routing, the treaty nuances, let's apply it. We're going to do a rapid-fire sequence of highly relatable, modern edge cases straight out of the ministry's 2026 guidelines. Here's our first intriguing test case. Does a moving ship, like a ferry or maybe a cargo vessel, count as a permanent establishment for the company operating it? Think about those core criteria we just learned.
The answer is clearly no. The ministry notes that a moving ship fundamentally lacks a permanent, fixed connection to the Earth's surface. It totally fails the spatial criteria. However, if you were to say permanently moor that ship and turn it into a floating restaurant that never ever moves, suddenly that spatial connection is established, and snap, the tax trap springs shut. Okay, what about something seasonal? Germany is famous for its Christmas markets, right? Does a wooden stall that is literally only set up for 4 weeks in December trigger the permanent establishment rules? Remember our 6-month temporal rule here? The answer is yes, it actually can. The document specifies that if there's a recurrent use of the exact same spot over time, like let's say you return to the exact same pitch at the market year after year, that repetition can satisfy the temporal stability requirement over a broader period. It's just a super fascinating application of how temporal routing actually works in practice.
Finally, let's look at the ultimate modern query. And yes, this is directly addressed in this 2026 tax document. What about an influencer or a content creator? Can streaming videos from your own bedroom accidentally create a taxable commercial permanent establishment right in your house?
The ministry provides a really crucial distinction here. Yes, your bedroom can be a permanent establishment if you use a specific area permanently and dedicatedly as a business facility. Your business basically becomes rooted there. However, and this is going to be a massive sigh of relief for a lot of people, if the location is merely used as a temporary, irregular backdrop for a video, it does not constitute a temporarily rooted business facility. The intent and the structural dedication of the space are quite literally everything. So what should you take away from all this? The rules defining a business presence are incredibly comprehensive and deeply nuanced. It is definitely not just about signing a commercial lease anymore. It's about time, intention, control, and rooting. Which leaves us with this final thought for you to chew on. As we push further and further into this digital, borderless age, is your physical footprint quietly writing your tax bill without you even knowing it? Thank you so much for exploring this with us on This Explainer. And hey, keep your eyes on where you plant your roots.